Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And I'm Dr. Hinson.
And we're the Good Doctors of Abbey Research. And we'd like to welcome you to our series on The Crown.
Oh, new series.
For anyone who has not joined us before, we are, as I said, the Good Doctors. We both have PhDs in social science. Mine is in sociology of religion and gender.
And mine is in history and anthropology with a focus on imprisonment and resistance.
So we previously covered The Handmaid's Tale, which was a really good intersection of both of our expertise. The Crown is less of an intersection.
Less of an intersection. Yeah, I don't have any expertise in being a monarch.
But there is a good argument that we are still talking about imprisonment and gender and religion, considering that Elizabeth did not choose to be the head of the Church of England at any point in time in her life, which she makes very, very clear. But for those of you who are following us from Our Handmaid's Tale, there's not going to be quite as much deep analysis in that way. However, we are still open to answering questions. If you have noticed things that perhaps we missed, etc., etc. What will still happen is that once a week, we will be dropping videos, episode by episode. And we definitely still want to be having discussion in the comments.
That's right.
So with all that said, welcome to our recap and an analytical rants, to be honest, about season 1, episode 1, Wolferton Splash.
Wolferton Splash. Yeah.
Essentially the first thing I noticed is that the writer and director of this episode are both gentlemen.
Yeah, I didn't notice this at all.
And I noticed that the first, 5 minutes of a show about the Queen of England was all about her husband.
It's called The Crown.
And we
spent
spent
of focus on Philip.
A lot of time on Philip. We spent a lot of time on the King, and we spent a lot of time on Churchill.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling that's going to continue.
I know. One of the things I thought that was really interesting, I mean, and they kind of show you that they're going to unpack the relationship between Elizabeth and Philip. There's a bit of an age difference between the two of them. I think it's 6 years or something. I don't remember.
She's 25 when this starts, by the way.
Yes.
So anyone who's watching who's over 25, imagine your 25-year-old self being given the Crown of England.
Yeah, because it happens pretty quickly after their marriage. They got married when she was, I think, 22, 21. Yeah. And then she becomes queen by 25. So one of the things that was interesting was this initial conversation that she's having with Philip as they're planning their wedding. And she really just wants to be, happy and accepted by her husband. And he's being particularly Philip about having to marry her. And she said, or won the greatest prize on the earth, right? Right, husband? And he was like, well, that's certainly what they think.
And this pause.
Dramatic pause.
And her face during that pause is
come on, dude.
Just tell her you love her.
Girl just wants to be loved for who she is, not for what she represents. And then he was like, and that's what I think too, kiss on the cheek. Not big fans of Philip to start the season. We'll see where that goes.
And we'll say, for those of you guys who we haven't met yet, we lived in the United Kingdom for several years.
Yes.
And we were both in the UK for Elizabeth's 90th birthday, Jubilee situation.
It was a big deal.
Big deal. I went to Oslo for it, but that's neither here nor there. And
I was in the UK. It was even before she went to Oslo. It was a big deal.
It was a big deal. It was a big deal that whole summer.
Yeah.
And my introduction to Philip was through my Northern Irish friends who referred to him as essentially a dotty old racist.
He has a history of saying deeply problematic and offensive things.
And the good news is that Matt Smith gets to say some of them right off the bat.
Yeah.
So
right to start.
We should say we are not reviewing the lives of these people.
No.
We are not reviewing the real people.
No.
We are certainly informed by watching the real people in the news. But we are reviewing the interpretations of them as on the show.
As they're represented as characters.
Because I am sure that Churchill was both just as much of a monster as he's portrayed and not the same at all.
Yes.
So we're going to be talking about the show. So there's a lot of things, even though the show wants us to pay attention to a lot of the men in her life, we're going to continue to try to pay attention to her. It was really clear, even now in present day actual reality, it's very clear that she didn't expect to be queen so quick or reign so long.
Yeah.
the way she talks about her marriage in the whole first episode, she thinks this is going to be private. Her life is going to be very private for a very long time. She has very traditional ideas of gender roles. She made sure the obey clause was in the marriage vows.
Was left in the marriage vows, yeah. And Churchill tells us that she insisted on it.
She insisted on it. Yeah. It's very clear that Philip had very, very traditionally gendered expectations of their marriage as well. He struggles a lot with power and not being in it. And it was very clear that he was okay giving up power politically in the world as long as he had the power in their marriage. And the quicker, that gets stripped away very quickly. And I don't think he really understood Crown Princess as her title. Like, I think he thought he was marrying a commoner who would one day have a cool job.
Yeah. I don't get the impression that Philip knew a lot of what he was getting into. But one of the things I keep coming back to with this show, and we'll get into this as the season progresses, is it possible for people to really know what they're getting into until they're in it? So I think that's what this first season plays with a lot in some of these episodes, is like, you can be told all the time that your life is going to change.
Yeah.
And that you're going to make all of these, life-changing decisions, and everybody's going to treat you differently. But until it actually happens.
And you know what makes that even harder is when no one communicates. Ever.
How delightfully British.
Yeah. My brother and I are taking over our father's company, for anyone who isn't following Abbey Research and the Abbey group of companies on other social media ventures. This company is, especially compared to the British Empire, quite small.
It's true.
I like to believe just as important. A lot less colonialism.
Yeah.
But we've been taking it over for a little while. Not nearly as long as Elizabeth knew she was getting a crown. That is neither here nor there. And we have been having for a solid 3 years now, probably every day of my life, a conversation about the transition. What do I need to know? What is the history of this decision that you have been making? Can you give me the context of your relationship with this individual?
Yeah.
Constant conversations. You know what our girl Lizzie got? 0 of that.
She gets a red box.
0 of that. She is still completely fearing his death, hiding behind this "she'll get better."
Yeah, and throughout the whole first episode, we don't really know the extent to how sick the king is.
Yeah.
We know he has a surgery. It's very clear to us, to the viewers, that he has a lung removed, but that is not what is expressed to the family. So they're covering up the severity of the illness, and the king says, a sick king does no good to anybody. There must be no weakness, no vulnerability. But how can you share the burden of running a monarchy if you're not vulnerable?
I think very pragmatically. Hey, by the way, someday I'll die because all people die.
Yeah.
So why don't we, maybe at 25 it was a little early to be brought in, but she's marrying the future prince consort.
They knew they weren't going to have any more kids. They knew she was going to be queen. This wasn't surprise.
This wasn't news.
No.
Because you could probably prepare to be queen for 50 years and still not be prepared.
Yeah.
So they gave her like a month.
He sat down and said, "Have fun back in Malta. I'm going to show you this red box of papers and tell you a funny story." That was it.
No.
That's all she gets.
She doesn't. So at one point, Churchill, who, as students of history, we have a complicated relationship with.
Correct.
But his wife, listen to me.
I know.
I don't know her name. I don't think they either use it.
I think she's just Mrs. Churchill.
So Mrs. Churchill is like, can we please piece out of this joint? Like, why are we doing this?
Yeah.
His party is, there's all these machinations that I give, even less than 0 craps about within the Conservative Party to get him in, get him out, what's going on, blah, 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 blah. I'm here for the crown, y'all.
Isn't this show supposed to be about the crown?
It's supposed to be about the queen. I'd like to really know more about our good girl Lizzie. That's okay. So we spent a lot of time with Churchill in this episode, but the most telling line to me was when his wife says, "Why don't you just leave?" And Churchill says, "She needs me."
Yes.
She does. She does.
She needs somebody.
Because nobody else, and even though he continues to prove to be problematic over the next, season and a half as an advisor, because he is deeply misogynist as a human being, and that's not just an analysis of the character. Smarter people than us
yeah.
have pointed out that Churchill did not know what to do with Elizabeth.
And we'll get into it more as the season progresses, I know. But it's fascinating to see the balance. We start to see this even early in the first episode between a very young royal family and a very old
prime minister,
conservative government, and what Britain is supposed to look like after the Second World War, coming through this extraordinarily traumatic time. They're still on rations, but in 1947 when the season starts. So that's part of her. She needs Churchill, but is Churchill also going to pull her in a direction she shouldn't go? We're going to get to see some of that.
And, like, every time we flashed to a cabinet room, it was a lot of, like, pensioners. A lot of, like, men in their 60s.
Old dudes, yeah.
And history and context are very important, but in a post-war England, they needed exuberance, they needed energy, and the cabinet was certainly not providing that.
The cabinet could barely manage to stay out of the hospital. They were so infirm.
Yeah, so I spent a lot of this episode feeling pretty bad for Elizabeth, honestly, because, and I have a feeling that will extend to most of the first season, because
I don't know that it gets much better.
Even though she's the most powerful person in the British Empire, which at that time, this is pre-colonialization, so they owned, like, I don't know, half the world.
A lot.
I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot of the world.
Yeah, her and Philip are gonna go on the Commonwealth tour,
which included Kenya, which I've never heard anyone say it that way, and I've been to that country several times.
Really old school British people.
British people said Kenya.
Kenya, yeah.
By the way, people from that country call it Kenya.
In case you were curious.
In case you were curious. And she has no power over her own life.
None at all. No agency, really. Very little. No choice in her profession, really. She knew from the time she was, 8? We don't know. Very young age that she was going to be Queen of England eventually.
But even the fantasy that she got to live in, that it would be when they were much older.
Yeah, that she was going to get to have this life with her husband in Malta, where he's the Royal Navy hero.
And his ego gets assuaged a little bit. And then he was going to have his career, and then she was going to swoop in and, like, maybe in her 50s have hers.
Yeah, when he was tired and didn't really need to be
the center of attention.
Spoiler alert, that's not what happens in our Philip struggles.
Philip does struggle. So, speaking of Philip struggling, in the one conversation that we see Liz and her dad have, in a very, like, dad conversation, they talk about the red box and everything, and she says, "Dad, can you take Philip shooting?"
Yeah. Bond with him.
Nice. I think he'd really like that. Anyone who has any daughter who has a relationship with her father, I would imagine that scene felt fairly familiar. Like, hi, this dude that I married, could you please just do something?
I want you to like him.
Could we at least be cordial?
Can you guys have a relationship?
Could I not have to manage both of your lives?
Would be swell.
Great. So they go shooting because England in the 40s, and we go to a place called Wolferton Splash. A splash is essentially a swamp with less moss that you find in central England.
Did you look that up, or did you know that?
No, I knew that. Sorry.
Oh, wow. No, that's cool. I didn't know that. Nice.
It's a swamp with less moss. And it's where they can plop around and shoot geese and ducks and
what have you.
Birds of a feather. Like, I'm just going to start singing Oklahoma, the story with the fringe on top. So, they have this convo. They get into the same punting boat, which anyone who's ever done a tourist experience in Cambridge, this is the boat that they send you down the river in Cambridge. It's a punter. It's flat in the back. Somebody stands and, like, rows you like a gondola. And instead of having an Italian man singing to you, you have drunk English people sipping Pimm's as you go by.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never been to Cambridge, so.
And Philip and the king have this whole conversation.
Yeah.
And the king says, I'm reading off of Dr. Hinson's notes.
That's right. I like to transcribe some of them.
You understand the titles, the dukedom, they're not the job. She is the job. The essence of your duty, loving her, protecting her. Of course, you'll miss your career, but doing this for her, doing this for me, there will be no greater act of patriotism or love. So it's two major threads of anyone's life. The job as her husband is her. The job as an Englishman is her.
Patriotism and love.
Patriotism and love. She is the job.
And he replies, I understand, sir, as if that's something you could totally understand, really.
And the king says, do you really? And then Philip, in the only honest thing he says in probably the 8 episodes, I think so.
I think so. We're going to find out whether or not he does in the upcoming episodes. But it's very clear that they love each other, that they care for each other. I have a great deal of sympathy for
both of them, honestly.
The difficult position that her father's seemingly sudden illness has put on her. So we'll see where this goes in the coming episodes. But it was a very kind of large idea to end the episode with, and some heavy lifting for Philip, which we'll see whether or not he's strong enough at the start.
In terms of things like leadership and gender roles and the things that we talk about all the time at Abbey Research, this is a pretty rich episode because of all the things we just talked about. The importance of communication between people that the English are generally allergic to.
In our experience.
In our experience and in every stereotype. They're generally allergic to, but companies can't afford to be.
No.
And royal families certainly shouldn't have been. We need clear communication and expectations, and strength is not keeping everything a secret.
Yeah. Strength is vulnerability.
Strength is vulnerability. Sure, the English people didn't need to know that he was dying, but his daughter sure should have.
His family needed to know the severity of his illness because his death, which is not a spoiler, leaves her, Elizabeth, extraordinarily unprepared. And while she is, and he is at the time of his life, and she becomes upon his death, the crown, there is far too much trust given in the position and not enough grace given to the person. So, I don't know if that's going to change. I don't know. But it might. So join us in our next video for season 1, episode 2, which is entitled Hyde Park Corner. And we'll find out exactly what that means. Take care, everybody. I'm Dr. Hinson.
I'm Dr. Donnelly.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.